Listen to the language of the last 3.5 years. Lockdowns, travel restrictions, stay-at-home orders. This rhetoric, written by government agencies and corporate media, speaks to a clear intention, a concerted effort to keep us in place. Fortunately for us, a real grassroots movement, powered by real men and women, can never be stopped. Because mankind will always find the way forward. And this is where it all starts. With the Way Forward's new membership platform, you can connect with like-minded community and like-minded businesses near you by simply typing in your zip or postal code and setting a radius. We also have a marketplace featuring the best holistic health brands and products with deals you won't find anywhere else. And the best part is, you pay whatever you want to be a part of it. The Way Forward starts with a growing community coming together to share ideas, form local groups, and conduct business with like-minded men and women. Because if we're constantly being told what to do by so-called authorities, it's easy to feel helpless. But it's essential to know that we're not. Each of us has the power, and that power amplifies when we come together. There are many more health-conscious and sovereign-minded men and women than we realize, and this is where we all meet. Visit thewayforward.com to join virtually, connect locally, and pay whatever you want to be a part of it. This is the way forward. I just had a conversation yesterday. You guys interviewed him for your podcast. His name's Pete Meglio. He does the deeper than etymology of words, and it is pretty interesting. It's like really, really interesting, and it always seems to check out. So that's one thing that's pretty interesting about it. But he brought up some good points on I guess there's nuance in calling out what currently is while not feeding through loosh farming, through our energetic awareness towards something, not feeding what is, and that's where I'm going back and forth on this issue of even needing to respond or feeling called to respond, right? Because I've gone pretty hard on this.
You're being called to respond because to me, you're a moral mountain, and you're sensing that something is off morally, and something within you is being someone needs to say something here. And for whatever reason, man, you have that voice, you have that ability, and you want to provoke where the moral dilemma is.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's a totally fair sentiment, and I think that's kind of what I landed on after talking to Pete. It's when so many people are caught in an illusion, they sometimes need people like me, people like you, other people who are able to poke holes in that illusion and sort of step onto that playing field, if you will, and speak to what's going on there. Now, the part that is tricky, let's say, and it's also really important, in my opinion, that we do this, is that we don't allow our consciousness and our focus to get pulled into the emotionality of it. Does that make sense? Because then we do become loosh farms for the powers that shouldn't be. And that's where I feel myself struggling a little bit, is being pulled into it.
Oh, I mean, I hear you, man. I think balance is always required. We've had this discussion before, and I think we need to have a focus on being as objective as possible.
Yeah.
Because truth is simply just another word for objective reality. And objective reality does exist. Sometimes it's murky, sometimes it's complex. But ultimately, the truth discovery process is in excavating down to what that is. And I think I personally, growing up as a Palestinian, my dad was born in Jerusalem. They came to Australia in 1971. Growing up, I never really dug deep into the story. It always seemed too complicated. It seemed too complex. I guess I wasn't really mature enough to really try to understand what's been going on. But something within me always knew that a time would come where I'm going to have to excavate as to what the real history is here, as to what's really taken place. And I think collectively, what we're witnessing, this has been like a very, in the collective's minds or eyes, a very murky, complex situation, which has been difficult to understand.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a deeper truth, which is wanting to come up and wanting to make itself known.
Amen.
Just like the vaccine issue in 2020 and with the COVID years, like no lie can remain unconscious for long, right? I think Buddha says 3 things that can't remain long hidden: sun, the moon, and the truth. And I think these events happen because there's a truth which is ready to be more well received by the masses of people.
Yeah.
And and this has just been festering in the unconscious. And so that manifests externally as events like we're seeing take place now. And it takes, grounded, moral, truth-seeking individuals now to go do that excavation work and be like, all right, what needs to be made known here? And I think that's what's taking place now, with people like you and I and many others who are going through this process of trying to really grapple with and understand this situation.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And it's such a delicate thing because like with COVID, we were touching on people's health preferences. It wasn't digging at as much what people consider to be a fundamental part of their identity. Whereas this particular situation is, which is why it's going to be why it is, and it will continue to be even more murky than the COVID situation was, because this is touching on religion, this is touching on ethnicity, this is touching on politics in a much deeper way than COVID was. And I guess I want to know, you said you've gotten the scoop from your dad. What was it like for him coming to Australia in early 1970s, basically fleeing Palestine?
Yeah, so I've recently had a conversation inquiring with my dad, not so specifically about life in Australia, but more so around the specific events around when they left Palestine. So if you're cool, I'll read it in his words. So in 1967, there was a 6-day war. Okay, we know this. This was when Israel took back the West Bank from Jordan, Gaza from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria in a surprise attack. Incredibly brutal 6-day massacre and land grab that took place. So he says, my uncle, so you're Sidor's brother. So Sidor is my grandfather. This is basically the Palestinian word for grandfather. So my grandfather's brother was in the Jordanian army at the time, fighting for freedom. And Israel was distributing leaflets, much like we've heard stories now, harassing, killing Palestinians, etc., and telling them to flee Jordan or die. So my family, they decided to stand their ground and they would not leave their residence or the furniture factory that was in Jerusalem. So my grandfather was quite a successful carpenter and he had a furniture factory. At the time, Israel had several taxes which it imposed on the Palestinians. And one of those taxes was a war tax. So basically, they wanted Palestinians to fund Israel's ethnic cleansing and war effort. And so my grandfather, he refused to pay this war tax. And several years passed, and the amount of the war tax that was owed accumulated. And then finally, in 1971, the Israeli tax collector, flanked by Zionist forces, turned up to the factory, ready to take all the machinery in lieu of the war taxes that were owed. And so the story goes that my grandfather yanked the 3-phase power cable attached to one of the machines, leaving the wires live and exposed near the concrete, and basically said, I'm not paying your tax, so you can fund the killing of my brother. You're not taking the equipment. Let's all just die together. And it was a standoff. Apparently, TV's crews turned up. They were filming everything. Yeah, eventually the tax collector left. And ultimately, this created, deep animosity between my family and the Zionist forces that were there. And so one of my grandfather's good friends, he was a Palestinian Jew. He intervened. And so Israel took over my grandfather's factory, and then they were given...
That's a key point, Palestinian Jew.
Yeah, that's right. And they were given passage to Australia. They received a little bit of money from the sale of the factory, and, they became Australian Palestinians.
Okay, so you brought up a lot of stuff there that sort of might conflict with what people typically think about this, right?
Yeah.
And two of those are when you say the word Zionism, people tend to jump at that given what's going on right now. And immediately on one side of the fence, people immediately think that sort of conflate Zionism with thinking that all Jews are immoral and they're
Mhm.
involved in this secret plan to take over the world, right? And then on the other side is the people who will say exactly that, that there is a conspiracy for all Jews, even just ethnic Jews or people who are Orthodox Jews, people who just follow the Torah to some degree, their parents were in the Holocaust, their grandparents were in the Holocaust, et cetera, are secretly trying to take over the world. And the former will call you an anti-Semite, and I think that this conversation is worth having despite how difficult it is. And then the other piece of that is, and this relates, is that you brought up how there were Palestinian Jews. A
Yeah.
Palestinian Jew intervened. So can you touch on all of that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so yeah, there were Jews who were identified as Palestinian who were living very peacefully on that land in well before 1948 for a very long time. So, there is such a thing as Palestinian Jews. There were multiple religions living cohesively. There were, we were Christians, for example, right? So there were Christians, Muslims,
Your
Jews
family was
living.
Christians in Palestine,
Yeah,
and they were
that's
living
right.
totally fine alongside Muslims
Yeah, my dad was
and
Catholic.
Jews.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm laughing because the narrative is, especially right now, coming from a lot of truth seeking people, in air quotes, that Muslims are trying to wage jihad on the entire world and establish a caliphate on top of the rubble of the world. And I think it's always hilarious when that's brought up, considering there's 1.9 billion people in the world who are Muslim.
Yeah.
So continue.
Yeah, man, I'll go photos of my dad being baptized as a Catholic in Jerusalem, Palestine,
Yeah.
in the late 60s. So yeah. So yeah, man, when it comes to the Zionist question, I think there's clear distinctions which need to be made here. And this is where a lot of the murkiness comes in. And I think this is where a lot of, the Jewish story, so to speak, is being weaponized in service of the Zionist agenda. And so Zionism is not Judaism. Okay. Zionism is this colonial settler ideology which basically condones, the pillaging of land, for a chosen people, for a chosen land, under this whole, religious idea and fairy tale. And it basically has nothing to do with Jewish values whatsoever.
Mm.
So Zionism can be connected to the Israeli state, but I would not either conflate the Israeli state nor Zionism with Judaism or Jewish people. In fact, Israel does not represent Jewish people. But the problem is we hear Israel in our minds and we think, okay, this represents all Jews. All Jews support Israel. All Jews are part of the Israeli cause. This is simply not the case. In fact, when World War II finished, only 10% of Jews who were in those intermittent camps came to Israel. Most of them decided not to live in Israel. And many of them went to Israel and they were sickened at what was going on. They were sickened at the racist laws that existed. And they wanted to still identify as Belgium or as French or as whatever it might have been. So, racist laws is not a Jewish value. An apartheid state is not a Jewish value. Bombing civilians intermittently is not a Jewish value. Holding political prisoners that have never been committed of any war crimes whatsoever, thousands of them, is not a Jewish value. Cutting off access to water and power, these are not Jewish values. So, there's millions of Jews worldwide who speak out against Israel and who want nothing to do with the Israeli states or the Zionist agenda.
Did your dad or anyone in your family um, talk more about what they experienced? Because you talked about how they left
Mm-hmm.
in early 1970.
Yep.
So that is well after the UN coming in and saying that Israel is now a state as of 1948. So is there any other stories from your family talking about what occurred between 1948 and the beginning of 1970?
While I don't have direct stories, I can
Or just
kind
a
of.
general sentiment of what it was like?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, like in 1947, we saw the UN partition plan, come in, which decided to give the minority of Jewish population, which was 500,000 people, close to 80% of the country, which of course was going to be rejected by the majority of Palestinians that lived there at the time,
I
which
think there
numbered
was over
nearly.
700,000 Palestinians that were pushed out in total.
Yeah, I think it could have been even more than that, but yeah, we'll go with that number. So this was what the Palestinians called the Nakba, right?
Yep.
And basically, Nakba means catastrophe, and many people think that I guess just this period is the Nakba, but no, that's when the Nakba started.
Yep.
To the Palestinians people, this is the ongoing catastrophe. It is the Nakba.
It's the Nakba this whole time, this past 5 years.
That's right. That's still been ongoing. But from what I understand, the second major event that took place was not until 1967.
Okay.
Which then was the 6-Day War.
And that's what you just mentioned before, the 6-Day War that your dad mentioned.
Yeah, that's right. Not to say that there could have been that there wasn't little bits of, intermittent violence and land grabs that were taking place. For me, with my current research and understanding, which by no means am I saying is the totality of the truth, there may have been a relative period of, acceptance and coexistence between
I'm sure there was a lot more of that than we realize, but
yeah,
this is the problem when it comes to situations like this. The overwhelming majority of people who are not acting as agents of the state, and even people who are sometimes acting as agents of the state, don't behave like this. It's when, we can refer to the Ash experiments, the Milgram experiments, the Stanford prison experiments to sort of look into the psychology of groupthink, people under so-called authority acting as agents of authority, and then people who are given authority to sort of inform, especially in more westernized cultures, how this authoritarian system sort of pervades all of society. And when people are given authority or acting as agents of authority, they tend to behave in ways that are fundamentally inhumane. And I previously thought that, okay, these 3 experiments were a window into the baseline for human psychology. But I don't think so, especially now understanding that much of the Western education system, and I guess you could say more westernized education systems and westernized governments, because I would say that given that, it was an Ottoman territory and then it was a British territory, there was a lot of Western influence in that area. That the Western education system is based on the Prussian education system. And the Prussian education system was all about bringing up and creating obedience to the state. And that is overt. It's not even a conspiracy. You can look up the Prussian education model and you'll find that is true, that it is all about breeding people who are subservient to the state and to the government and to authority. So with that, I would say that the overwhelming majority of people at that time were likely living peacefully. But the problem is we have the UN declaring that this is now the state of Israel. And then the Nakba, which began, as you're saying, wasn't one single event, began in 1948 to expel Palestinian people from that land. And I mean, I've now seen testimony from, I don't have it with me, I have it on another one of my devices, but I can send it to you after this, and I'll link it in the show notes. This documentary, I forget the name of it, but it has testimony from several, I guess, who would have been Israeli soldiers, because I think the IDF was basically immediately established upon the creation of the Israeli state. But
and
IDF,
that's something to note also is that between the Zionist militia and the Palestinians never formed a militia. They were never, they've never had an army. There's never been a Palestinian army.
No.
And this is where the imbalance takes place, because the Zionists very quickly became armed and they became a force. And that's why what happened in 1948 was able to take place.
Exactly. And And there's testimony from countless IDF soldiers who initiated what happened in 1948 to expel Palestinian people of all religions. That's another important point, from that land. And what they talk about doing is horrifying. Like,
Yeah.
and they're saying it in a very casual way, very matter of fact way. And what they're talking about is like uh, harassing 16-year-olds and younger, and just like violently throwing people out of their homes, walking in and just shooting a bunch of people and then just dragging the bodies out of their homes. It is the most atrocious things that you can do to another human being. And that's what was done from 1948 on, especially because there seems to be these sentiments that, well, the government said that this happened, and like, we can't control what the government does. And, I acknowledge that to some degree, because when you buy into the illusion of authority as the people who are under the so-called subject of that authority, totally get that. But it's almost giving the government and its behavior a pass, because then people will also say, well, the Palestinians initiated the conflict. The Palestinians are the ones who keep on pushing this conflict. And I look at that and I'm like, yeah, they just had their land taken. They were just forced out of their homes. Like, what? This is self-defense. They're being violently thrown out of their homes by people who are much more well-armed and backed by, quote, governments of the world. Of course they're going to fight back and try to get their land and houses back. What?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head, man. You're like, well, what do you expect? What do you expect them to do? And I think, because come this period, 1947, 1948, this is where the narratives completely diverge, right? And so from the Zionist propagandist perspective, the massacre is romanticized because they were able to then obtain a Jewish majority and form the state of Israel. So it's like, it's kind of forms the basis of this romantic idea of, oh, now we have an Israeli state. And so, the massacre was kind of worth it. And so you got to understand also, like, the heavy propaganda that is being pushed onto the Israeli population around these events, but not only the Israeli population, onto the West as well, right? You have this idea that the Arabs rejected the partition plan. They began a massive attack against the Jewish community, tried to destroy them, tried to kill them. And this is what's taught pretty much throughout the West, and it fits under this ongoing story that someone's just always trying to kill the Jews. And then, we're told miraculously the Jews won. They were able to establish a Jewish state. And so then, like, this is all just a wonderful idea, right? Because again, it's romanticized. These are the descendants of King David. In the same way they're able to conquer Goliath, right? It makes perfect sense. And so no one really questions this idea. No one really questions this story.
And what's so disgusting is that Israeli officials are appealing to both Christians and Jews who are practicing Christians and Jews. As an example, Netanyahu using verses from the Bible to reinforce what the Israeli government is doing to Jewish people, or sorry, to Palestinian, well, and to Jewish people, but to Palestinian people right now. And this is where it's so sticky when we get into like Christian Zionism, and I don't want to go off on a tangent on that, but
it's necessary, but yeah,
it is necessary. But there's a lot of Christians who are also reinforce, I would say more in the United States. There's actually, because there's a larger concentration of Christians here, but there's a lot of Christians who are reinforcing Israel's, quote, right to self-defense, which in actuality is Israel indiscriminately bombing Gaza, killing, thousands of innocent men, women, and children, displacing hundreds of thousands more.
For 75 years, not just the last,
this is the thing.
Just the last 3 weeks.
Exactly. It's not just the last 3 weeks. It's the last 75 years of this, but especially so in the last three weeks. I mean, I think the stats are the Israeli government, I forget the stats, but I know that they've dropped more bombs in the last 3 weeks than they have in a larger chunk of time in the last, I don't know how many years, but it's like my aunt, I love her. She's amazing. And she saw through the COVID stuff, but anytime I send her stuff related to Israel-Palestine, she says something along the lines of, well, this is biblical. And we're supposed to support Israel and the Jewish people because they're God's chosen people. And this is where, and I love the distinction that you made, distinguishing between the state of Israel and the people on the land. Because let's play with the idea that she is correct biblically, although she's not, because if you even play on it from a Christian perspective, Jesus fulfilled the law, fulfilled the Mosaic covenant, or the Mosaic covenant is no longer in effect. And that's what gave, quote, Jewish people the right to that land. And that's, that's something that we can talk about later. I kind of
and also despite the fact that, as we know, Herzl, the father of Zionism, like wasn't even totally intense on Palestine being the land for Jewish people.
They were looking at Uganda. They were looking at several other places. Exactly.
That's right. So the conflict is there from the get-go. Like this story that doesn't have roots. He was looking at Uganda. He was looking at Cyprus. He just wanted a home for Jewish people. So the promised land theory doesn't hold weight.
100%. And let's play with for a second the idea that the Jewish people are God's chosen people, which, okay, let's play with that. Does that mean that we support the state of Israel and the Israeli government because they've cleverly taken the name that has biblical precedent, that we then support it? It's like saying that, because the Center for Disease Control is called the Center for Disease Control, we should support disease control. So therefore, we have to support the CDC.
It's like saying that the United Nations represents the United Nations.
Exactly, dude. So when people say they support the Israel to do what it's doing, are you talking about the Israeli government? Are you talking about the people in Israel? Are you talking about the land? Are you talking about the people on the land? What do you mean when you say you support Israel? And it's the same thing. And I think people don't think about this because they struggle to differentiate between themselves as a man or a woman and the state that is claiming jurisdiction over the land that they're on. It's the same when people say, I love America. What do you mean? I talked about this with Larkin Rose. What do you mean when you say you love America? Or like when you point to the US flag and say that flag represents freedom. Does that flag actually represent freedom? Why is it flying outside of the IRS, the DEA, the ATF, the CDC, the FBI, the CIA? And why is this flag responsible for millions of deaths in the Middle East? Like when you say that, like you support Israel, what exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah. And in fact, bro, I have this quote from George Washington, actually. He says, passionate attachment of one nation to another, habitual hatred or fondness towards another nation facilitates the illusion of an imaginary common interest. It pushes a nation into the quarrels and the wars of the other. Right. So here you have the founding father of America saying, it's wrong to facilitate this imaginary common interest by exemplifying fondness or identifying with the plight of another nation. And here we have America funding ethnic cleansing,
funding,
and 100%. So you say, I love America, but like this what we're witnessing from America isn't American values, isn't American traits, by any means whatsoever.
Yeah, and this is the problem when people identify with the state, and even further, like, and this is something that is very touchy to bring up, but it is objectively true and it is worth considering. Let me pose a question to you.
Okay.
Let me pose a question to you. If maybe this might be hard for you to answer because you're not American, but let's just play with this. If the majority of the mainstream media was owned by people who were professing to be Muslim or had allegiance to or ties to or citizenship with a predominantly Muslim country, and a large chunk of politicians in the US had dual citizenship with a predominantly Muslim country, what would most Americans and Westerners think upon realizing that?
You tell me.
I mean, I can say that based on what I see, most Americans would freak the F out if that were true, screaming this is a major conflict of interest, screaming that this is wrong. And of course, most Americans have been indoctrinated. Well, not most, a lot of Americans.
Because that was my point, unless they've been propagandized for the longest possible time that this is a friendly situation.
Exactly. So the point is, though, that, and this is objectively true. And again, I want to be clear here. I'm not saying whatsoever that all Jewish people are in on this grand conspiracy. Absolutely not.
They're
Absolutely
not. And
not.
again, this is where the distinction between
Yes.
Judaism and Zionism matters.
100%, man. And because I have friends who are Jewish people, many friends of mine that are Jewish actually agree with what people like you and I are saying. And then of course there are countless examples. Well, we don't even need to make those qualifying statements. But the point is, objectively, much of the mainstream media has or executives of the mainstream media, let's say, have ties to Israel. And many U.S. politicians, I forget the exact number, but many politicians in Congress and in the Senate have dual citizenship with Israel. Again,
disproportionately.
Like way disproportionately, right?
Yeah.
Now, if that were the same case where they had ties to a predominantly Arab and Muslim country,
yeah, they'd freak the fuck
Americans out. Would freak the fuck out. And I'm not saying that we should freak the fuck out at what is objectively true, but it is weird why we can't question that. And this is where it's so important to distinguish between Zionism and, or we could say distinguish even between, because Zionism gets a little sticky too, but distinguish between people who are objectively immoral, who are claiming to be of a certain ethnic group or of a certain religion, the Zionism itself, because even Zionism, you could make the argument, no, that's just saying Jewish people have a right to a homeland. And I'm like, okay, what exactly do you mean by that? Like, do Jewish people have a right to exist peacefully in places? Absolutely they do. But do I think that Jewish people have a right to a homeland? I guess in theory, that sounds great. But what that means is that they are coming in and violently throwing people out of their homeland, then no, I don't think they have a right to do that. I don't. And if that is what Zionism is, then I think it is fundamentally wrong.
Yeah,
now,
but according to Zionism, there's no moral dilemma according to their story. Yeah.
But people share sentiments about Zionism that are the former, where it's like, oh, Jewish people just have a right to a homeland. I'm like, yeah, Jewish people and all people have a right to like live somewhere, of course, peacefully, without question. But again, if Jewish people having a right to a homeland means that they're taking land from other people, that is wrong. And I do not support Zionism in that case. And that's overwhelmingly what Zionism is. Despite your fantasy ideas about what Zionism should be, what Zionism actually is immoral and wrong. Just as the fantasy ideas, oh, well, the Communist Manifesto sounds great in theory when you read it. It does. When you read the Communist Manifesto, you're like, wow, this actually doesn't sound as bad as I thought it would be. But communism in actuality is atrocious, and it's the same thing.
Yeah, and communism in practice has caused the death of millions.
So is democracy in practice, though, by the way. But that's, we can talk about
that. That's right. Yeah. And this is where, really, man, religion it blurs the truth, right? And it blurs objective reality. And so this moves us away from where we want to be. And so we see this conflation of, Christian conservatives and the Zionist story. And we see a mass of people that are unwilling to look at facts and unwilling to look at objective reality, because this story harkens back to some, religious, ancestral, emotionally infused idea that, if the Jewish people or if, have this Israeli state, then all of a sudden, their Christian, idea is going to come to fruition, and whatever the hell else they think might take place will take place. And they play on this. They play on this paradigm, right? The Zionism hides behind the veil of these different religions in this way. Ultimately, it undermines them, but it's doing a pretty good job at the moment of manipulating masses of people away from the facts and into condoning terrorism on the broader scale.
Mm-hmm. And the thing is that I think is difficult with the situation, and I sympathize with Jewish people in this regard. They have been conditioned to believe, like Black people in America have been conditioned to believe, that what happened in the past is bound to happen again in the future. unless they subscribe to the ideology that they are an oppressed people, that they are people who are always subject to other people hating them, that they are a people who should be fearful, that Israel needs to exist because it's the only place where if a Holocaust happens in another country, then the Jews can flee to Israel and be safe. And it's no different than Black people who think the same, who are conditioned to believe that they are always going to be inferior to white people, that they are always going to be oppressed by white people, that they are always going to grow up and be at a disadvantage. And it's simply not true. And just as when we look at the statistics on Black people now are increasingly more educated, and it's more of a classist thing than it is a systemic racism problem. It's the same when we look at Jewish people. How is that the case if Jewish people are disproportionately, and again, this is objectively true, disproportionately overrepresented in politics, in the media, et cetera, et cetera. And they're living peacefully. Again, I would say right now, it does get a little bit shaky. And I totally understand where, because of the blowback of the state of Israel and people's inability to differentiate between Jewish people and the Israeli government, Jewish people are being disproportionately targeted right now. I'd imagine that's fucked up. That is objectively wrong and should not happen. But previous to this situation, Jews have been living peacefully around the world with relatively small issues. Is there always going to be some sort of anti-Semitic behavior towards Jewish people? Yes. Is there anti-white behavior right now? Yes. Is there is there racist behavior towards Black people? Yes, that's always going to happen. But
well, I mean, it's happening in Palestine, Israel.
Exactly, man. And if you, so this is where I think it would behoove of Jewish people to work on distinguishing themselves from the actions of the Israeli government, because what will continue, I made that video, what will continue to harm Jewish people around the world is the actions of the Israeli government while claiming to represent Jewish people. That's a big issue. Like, what the Israeli government is doing is objectively wrong. Of course it has, like, people who say that this has to do with self-defense and targeting Hamas. Give me a break, man. Like, it's so obvious at this point that it has nothing whatsoever to do with that.
But it's not even a war. I think when it's not, we say war, it's not a war. We're talking about one state with two classes of citizens and an apartheid regime that's been going on now for 75 years, where you have camps of people who are suffering, who don't have proper sewage systems, who don't have proper access to water, electricity, living within an hour of one of the most contemporary cities in existence, right? And we call this a war. It's not a war. It's not a conflict. It's
the Hamas, and we can talk about what Hamas actually is, and I don't even know if we want to get there, but Hamas doesn't have tanks. The Palestinian people don't have tanks. Let's set Hamas aside. The Palestinian people don't have tanks. The Palestinian people don't have F-16s. The Palestinian people don't have attack helicopters. The Palestinian people don't have fully automatic machine guns. Like that's just the truth. They don't have that. So to call this a war is absurd. It's not a war.
But even on a territorial basis, these are people, two different groups of people, it would seem, but they're living in the same country, right? A war would denote two separate countries. You don't have that. You have one country which has systemically, been over the years just ebbing away at the land and access to human rights that's available to one other group of citizens within that country. It's not even now, like we think Gaza is a separate country. It's not. It's just a little patch of land that they decided to give to another class of citizens and say, here you go, but within the greater state.
We all know that Big Ag is poisoning our food supply, and Big Pharma's so-called medicine is straight up poison. What most people aren't aware of, though, is that most supplements are also filled with artificial sweeteners, dyes, GMOs, glyphosate, and a host of other toxic ingredients, even many of the more natural supplements. My good buddy James Benefico dedicated his life to crafting the world's cleanest, most nutritious organic supplements after a pre-workout energy drink caused heart palpitations so severe that he almost landed up in the ER. Organic Muscle was born, revolutionizing sports nutrition by using exclusively non-GMO ingredients from USDA organic farms. Since then, tens of thousands of people, including myself, have leveled up their fitness and their health with Organic Muscle's award-winning natural pre-workout. There's no jitters, no heart palpitations, no itchy skin, just nourishing organic food and herb-based ingredients for clean, sustained energy, strength, endurance, and recovery. Numerous studies have shown that tonka ali is the most effective herb in the world for naturally boosting testosterone levels. And we know that testosterone levels are depleting all over the world because of what's put in the food supply, what we're exposed to. Organic Muscle has the world's first fully organic tonka ali supplement. I only support and promote things that I actually use, and I can say I legitimately use Organic Muscle products. Use code FORWARD15 at checkout for 15% off at organicmuscle.com. The thing I want to focus on at this point of the conversation too is what can we do? What can we do about this? Because a lot of people are feeling extremely helpless. Muslim people and Jewish people right now feel like there's a target on their back. Like I would say both are equally true at this point. I mean, I've seen some articles where Muslim people have been targeted in the United States as what happened, just after 9/11, and Jewish people are being targeted on university campuses. And that's, of course, objectively wrong. When mankind is caught up in this situation, what can we do as men and women?
Bro, we need truth. We need truth more than ever. And like you touched on, in the same way that the conflation between, the Christian ideology and Zionism helps the Zionist agenda, like you mentioned, it doesn't help Jewish people at this point in time to be conflated. Because what we're seeing is now they're being unfairly targeted and blamed and, chanted against amongst these rallies that are taking place around the world, when Judaism, I repeat again, does not represent the Israeli state or the values of Zionism whatsoever.
Yep.
So I think it's really important that, we continue to have these conversations. And I used to be one of the people that believed that this was a very complicated, murky, religiously, emotionally infused, situation. But it's not. When you look at history, it's pretty clear what's going on. Facts are available to us, and facts do exist. So I think we need to move away from radicalism and extremism on both sides of the scenario. I'm definitely not a fan of these free Palestine rallies where they're chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
Amen. Because what that is implying, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
That's implying an Israeli genocide.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. It's implying Israeli genocide, which is equally harmful.
And so when we buy into extremism on either side, just because it might, fall within this preconditioned belief system that we have, that's when we're doing the bidding of the overarching cultist and WO agenda more than anything else. So, within our own personal domain, we need to find balance. We need to find center. And we need to, again, observe objective reality in order to help that process. I think we need to really sharpen our intuitive faculties in terms of the information we're consuming, and really understand and get a sense of when something is being infused with unnecessary emotionality or fanaticism, and realize how this is playing on us into then, being loose farmed, so to speak, as you put it earlier. So this is, again, man, this is a call to greater discernment, just as the whole 2020 period was. This is as well, but simply in a different context. Now we're grappling with a different shadow of humanity that's coming up ultimately to
playing
be integrated.
On our false identities much more.
Yeah, exactly, man. That's something to be observed as well. Like, what are these identities that I have for myself out there? Because those identities, like you said, that's where I'm prone to manipulation,
Dude, it's an interesting point, because when I was an Army officer, even as I was waking up to what the U.S. government did, when people would speak ill of the U.S. government, I would feel personally attacked. I would feel personally attacked at that. Now, when people criticize the U.S. government, even if I disagree with them, even if it's like objectively untrue about something about the U.S. government, but most likely it's not, I don't feel any emotional tug associated with that, because I don't subscribe to or identify with the U.S. government at all. And it's it's so difficult right now because with the state of Israel, it is wrapped up. Like, statism is itself a religion, and it is a dangerous religion. It's even more dangerous and pervasive and subversive when it is wrapped up in an actual religion and claiming to represent the people of an actual religion. And that's what makes the situation so sticky. But irrespective of how murky that belief system is, it's important that we dissolve it and stop identifying with it. And I'm not saying that you should stop practicing Judaism or even calling yourself a Jew or showing love for the land that is Israel, right? I'm not saying to not do that. I'm saying to understand that that is a monopoly piece on a monopoly board, and that's not who you truly are. I think who you truly are is really nameless, and it's hard to put words to what it actually is. And people have different connotations for it or ideas of what that is, a child of God, this, and that. But irrespective of what you think it is, the best way to personally discover who and what you truly are is by dislodging all of the things that you aren't. And that's what we're being called to do right now, is dislodge all the identities that are not fundamentally who we are.
Yeah, that's right, man. We all have far more in common with each other under the human umbrella and under the values of humanity than we do not. And these belief systems, they form psychological attachments, which ultimately are harvesting our power, right? They're harvesting our ability to be more human, to think more rationally, to be creative human beings. And I think what you and me and others have been doing, so to speak, in beginning to detach and disidentify, with these illusory identities, is we're reclaiming our power. We're bringing it back home into our own sovereign domain, and we're utilizing it in service of higher values, of higher truth. And I think that's what we're all being called to do at this point in time, really, And I think that this detanglement between religion and statism and the role that plays in our own psychology is something that we're being called to address right now. I think that's why this is coming up.
And I think right now it is vitally important that when we hear something, when we take in information that is inherently emotional, right? Like witnessing children being pulled out of the rubble, of which I would say that it's important that we do not consume way too much of that, because we're not truly meant to know what's happening all the way over there. We're supposed to be focused on what's happening here. That is not to say that we should not be aware, in my opinion. And for everyone has a different role to play. For some people, it may not be necessary for them to see that. They just know of it and they're just focused on the now. But I personally feel called to comment on it. And I would say Joel would say the same, because we see so many people who are getting pulled into it, who are helping to perpetuate and feed more of that, which is why we're commenting on it. But all that to say that when something like that triggers an emotional response in you, observe it. Feel that emotion. My friend Nathaniel Solis says, emotions come because they are meant to be felt. That's the whole point of an emotion. It's not meant to be suppressed. It's meant to be felt and meant to move through you. So when these emotions arise, allow it to move through you, but don't project it onto other people. That's the thing. Don't allow it to dictate your approach with reality and how you move about reality, because that makes you prone to then being the antagonist related to that emotional situation and feeding more of the same energy. Just like we see, there's a lot of emotionally charged people who identify with what's happening to Palestinians, who are now, because they are so enraged in their emotions, calling for the death of Jewish people or the death of Israeli people, which is perpetuating more of the same energy. And I would say overwhelmingly,
that's the agenda.
That's the agenda there, man.
Right.
Exactly.
Like these ancient cultists, they've mastered this game of divide and rule, and they play it so well. They know our own psychology better than we know ourselves, for the majority of us. So self-knowledge, self-ownership, a regulated nervous system. It's never been more imperative, particularly under the umbrella in the context of fifth generation warfare, which we are now under as well. For the first time, as we're seeing 4K images of war and violence and heinous brutality being bombarded on our psyches in a way which has never before been experienced in humanity. Then you can swipe to the next reel and you see a dog jumping through a hoop. Yeah. Right? Like, are you giving yourself
crazy, dude?
Are you even giving yourself the appropriate time to feel the impact of what you just observed? Right? Or are you just quickly going to the escape mechanism of like what's the next thing?
A miniature act of PTSD, essentially. Like that is viewing another human mangled and blown up. Like that is creating I don't know what to call it, but like a split in your psyche. That is impacting.
And it's intentional, man. Like we got banned from TikTok recently for simply reels from our podcast.
Yeah.
But yet there's no issue with the 4K bloody graphics of war being thrown at. So obviously it serves some reason, and it serves to traumatize. It serves to keep us in the third stage of ideological subversion, which is sustained crisis. When you have a populace that's in sustained crisis and they've been in fear, panic, and terror for such a long period of time, went from COVID to Ukraine to Israel, then we become very easily manipulated, and our freedoms can be then more inhibited through that process. And this is all part of the plan. This is all part of the greater agenda. So it takes each individual to come into more self-ownership, regulate their nervous systems, know themselves, align with the common values of humanity. That's what we need now more than ever, because at the same time, man, majority of people have been brainwashed with this idea that like Arabs are animals, like Muslims are like second-class citizens, and like, so we don't think of the death of some Arab Muslim in that country the same way that we might think of, a Westerner or a Jewish baby or whatnot whatsoever. But these are real human beings that also fall under the human umbrella. In fact, these are incredibly intellectual human beings.
Yep.
All right. Palestine, despite not having any schools, despite having little access to school, despite having intermittent access to power, they have one of the highest literacy rates in the world. It's like at 98% or something. Okay.
These are human beings.
They're human beings. Like, go look at Palestine pre-1948. Go Google the city of Jaffa.
Dude, they had railway systems. They had theaters. Yeah, man. They had like a very like well-populated urban centers. Like, it was absolutely a bustling society. It wasn't like there was just people roaming and living in nomadic huts.
Yeah,
like,
man. Incredible educational facilities, incredible performing arts centers. All the biggest Arab stars would go there to perform, and it was a bustling society, like you're saying. And now Jaffa is Tel Aviv. Some people, in fact, even say Tel Aviv Jaffa. They still keep it on the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, bro. I really recommend that people go and research Miko Peled. Miko Peled, he wrote a book called The General's Son. His father was a general in the Zionist army in 1948, and he gives recounts and stories of the period, and he provides objectivity in a way that I believe is really, really needed right now. And it's like, this guy was raised within the Zionist propaganda system. His father's one of the leading generals. I think he was one of the names that signed the Israeli Declaration of Independence. But yeah, Miko Peled, I highly recommend people go check that out too.
Yeah. And then people will bring up the son of Hamas thing. And I don't discount that the son of Hamas who's speaking out against Hamas is incorrect. Like, I'm sure I haven't looked into it, but I'm sure much of what he's saying is correct. But the reality is, when it comes to the Zionist Israeli regime or Hamas, ultimately they're both extreme in their ideology, and we should condemn the actions of both of them. Like, it's pretty easy here to just side with innocent men, women, and children who have no part in this, who are unfortunately caught in the crossfires of, I guess you could say, the Israeli government, primarily because they created Mossad, but I mean, they created Hamas through Mossad, and they helped to fund Hamas to oppose Yasser Arafat. But the point is, like, we can play this game of finding an extremist in any position all the time. Like, people will bring up quotes from Muslims to sort of reinforce the idea that all 1.9 million or billion Muslims across the world are essentially partaking in a radicalized religion. I could find the same when it comes to Jewish rabbis too, who are saying some of the most grotesque things that you can say about other human beings. And ultimately that does not represent the whole.
And we're being intentionally fed the minority of extremists through social media. So then we can be conditioned to conflate this extreme minority with the entire populace. And so the ongoing psychological divide and conquer regime continues and becomes successful.
Amen, man. Amen. What are you doing on a daily basis to help calm your nervous system and remain grounded? Because like me, I know that you've seen some of these images coming both from what happened to Israeli people on October 7th, which were horrifying, but then also from October 7th on, the images that have been coming out of Gaza primarily, and now some coming out of the West Bank, which are pretty disturbing too. What are you doing to when you see these images and feel the emotions associated with them? How are you coming back to a calm nervous system?
Bro, I mean, I think the goal is to, as best you can, let your body do its thing and allow it to feel what needs to be felt. I was having breakfast this morning and just like out of nowhere, man, just honestly just overcome with the emotions and just, started weeping and grieving for what's taken place. So I think creating the space to actually process, and really think about how you actually feel about what's going on and let your body catch up to what your psyche is now perceiving on a mass level that it's not used to is super, super important. Get out in nature as much as you can, leave your phone, have proper breaks from your phone. Doesn't need to be on you constantly. Listen to the sounds of nature, man. Be with your body, breathe deeply, ground, just YouTube and nervous system regulation exercises. There's lots of, good options out there, shaking, grounding, tapping, EFT, whatever it might be. But self-acceptance, self-love, within your own domain is so important right now, man, because everything around us is trying to disembody us, right? And the other factor is that we need our body in the process of truth discovery as well. It holds many incredible gifts. Empiricism is something that can't be ignored right now. So giving yourself the opportunity to find methods of embodiment, throughout this time is crucial.
Yeah, amen, man. And for me, you brought up EFT, emotional freedom technique. That's a huge
Yeah.
one that I do.
Yeah.
Grounding, I do qigong in the morning, and
Yeah.
that's huge for me. And just movement, man. Even just like working out. I tend
Yeah. That's
to
it.
experience a lot of rage and anger when I see some of these images and frustration, and really frustration towards the freedom movement right now, that in air
Yeah.
quotes, because I don't expect so-called quote normies to be able to see through what's going on at this point, but it is frustrating with when people I typically would have identified with at this point, given what's happened the last 3.5 years, are clearly caught up in this illusion to a degree that might be even worse than people who are caught up in the COVID illusion. Well, I mean, we'll see how it shakes out, but I'm finding that if I am not letting my rage out in a way that is not projecting it onto other people, I will project it onto other people. And I can't say that I have been perfect over the last 3.5 weeks and how I've been communicating this, but at least I'm
Yeah.
aware of that. And I always attempt to communicate it in as loving as a way as I possibly can. And that's not forcing myself to be loving and suppressing the emotions that I'm feeling. No, no, no. It's important to feel those, but not project them onto other people. And once they've been felt, you can come back to balance, come back to being centered, and then communicate the message that needs to be communicated, or just, go about reality in the way that is helping to bring more of what we are all wanting to experience: peace, love, truth, harmony,
Yeah.
true freedom. That's what we want. And in order to get there, we need to ensure that we are taking radical self-ownership and not perpetuating more of the same energy. Are we going to fuck up sometimes? Absolutely we are. But it's important to be aware of it and try to correct that behavior when it comes in.
Yeah. And man, I think it's really important for people to hold the notion clear in their minds that peace is possible in their lifetime as well. And even peace in the Middle East and in this situation is possible. Many people never thought that the apartheid regime in South Africa would ever end, but it ended. Many people never thought the Berlin Wall would fall, but it fell.
Yeah.
And so peace does have a way of coming back around. And I think one of the branches of the agenda is to make us think that we're just in this ongoing, never-ending conflict and turmoil that we just have to live through forever. And I refute that idea, man. I don't think that we should be speaking about it if we didn't think that ultimately peace was possible.
Amen, man. I 100% agree. And I just had a conversation with Peggy Hall about this. She proposes that, yeah, the two-state solution will not work because it is fundamentally divisive. It's divisive, and it's still treating one class of people as much less than, as really in less than human, right? Whereas and I don't know how this will work, but again, it's on each of us, everyone in the world, to take radical self-ownership and not perpetuate more of the same. But the only thing that could work at this point, in my mind, is a one-state solution where they just fucking let those artificial borders fall and say, hey, like, we need to, this is going to shake out in a really interesting way. We need to have some conversations, but we should live amongst each other at this point.
I agree, man. It is one state. The apartheid needs to end. The same rights need to be given to the entire population of Palestine or Israel, which are just two words for the same country at this point. Mm-hmm. Everyone needs to be one person, one vote. And whatever people's current ideas of democracy, I know we didn't get there in this conversation, I guess needs to have a chance, in my opinion, as a starting point.
Yeah. Yeah. So some form of, I mean, this could be like a 3-part series if we talked about like what form of politics would work. Because
I mean, we can't really bring on our idea of what freedom and liberation would look like when it's not even present in the West. Like, let them start with some. Let them start with something.
Yeah, we'll leave that for another time. Man, okay. I'm so glad we did this conversation over, because we originally recorded one and it was good, but I think this one shook out so much better, especially sort of allowing both of us time to reflect and allowing you to have that conversation with your dad and get some more insight into his experience. Because I feel more calm in my nervous system now than I did a week ago when we had our initial conversation, because it was right in the midst of a lot of stuff still happening. But I think as time's gone on, and it's not that I'm desensitized to it. It's like, okay, that's happening. I'm aware of it. And what can I do right now as a man and as someone with a platform to help pull people out of perpetuating more of it? And that's kind of what I'm focused on now. And I think this conversation was perfect, man. Acknowledging what is, acknowledging what happened, but focusing on not perpetuating more of what happened. And vengeance is never the answer. Targeting innocent people, never the answer. Discriminating against innocent people, irrespective of whatever their religion is, never the answer. And the only answer is taking radical self-ownership of your thoughts, your feelings, your beliefs, and your actions in this world, and ensuring that you are not perpetuating more of the same stuff that we're seeing happening right now.
Beautifully said, man. I agree, bro. That first conversation, I think, was us letting the steam out, shaking the dust off.
It was good for us.
it was good for us, bro. It was good for us. But yeah, bro.
Can you share about what you guys are doing at Here for the Truth and Rise Above the Herd?
Yeah, for sure, man. So for those that don't know, I'm the co-host of the Here for the Truth podcast with my dear friend Erasmus. We've been a guest on the way forward together. He's an absolute legend. And yeah, we have conversations week in, week out with amazing, incredible individuals, and we try to do our part to, implement our own light in terms of truth, freedom, self-responsibility, self-ownership. And, our big ethos is becoming who you were born to be as an individual. You're an individual with unique gifts and a unique life path, which you alone can walk. And that's not something to be taken for granted. So really coming home to who you are and becoming the most empowered version of yourself is a priority for us. And so we have our group coaching program, Rise Above the Herd, which helps you decondition from disempowering philosophies, and really build authentic self-esteem and become who you were born to be. There's this whole concept of entelechy, which says that the blueprint of the oak tree already exists within the acorn. And in the same way, you have this unique blueprint which wants to sprout as well. And it only sprouts when you walk the authentic path and say no to the inauthentic highways which have been given to us for us to bypass what's really meant for us. And I think that's the most powerful work that we can do, is bringing back the gift, bringing back the treasure that only we can. And that's our focus.
And for those who are listening, their podcast is one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. I listened to your episode on Zionism with Gavin. I forget Gavin's what's Gavin's last name?
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, that one's an incredible episode. What number is that one?
That's 145.
145. And then my other favorite one that you guys did is the one with G. Edward Griffin. That one was awesome.
Thanks, man.
Especially as like Yerasimos, and I think you got a little bit emotional too towards the end when he said he's proud of you guys. That was super cool.
Man, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, and it's pinch myself moments day in, day out to be able to talk to these, incredible human beings whose shoulders we are standing on and who paved the way for you and I to sit down right now and have this conversation and have it be heard in a way that they probably never could have dreamed of when they started this journey.
Amen.
50, 60, 70 years ago. And I just want to give one more shout out to, we have an episode coming out with Michael Tsarian where we're dispelling the Jewish super conspiracy. And we're going into, the war on Jews as a whole and how they're being unfairly targeted. And we're going to go into the history of these cults, the Sabbatean Frank cult, which very much hides behind the veil to try undermine civilization under the guise of, religion.
Yep. And I'm sure this deep, dark group of people has used various religions throughout history to do
throughout the years, man. They hide behind Islam, they hide behind Christianity, exactly. They hide behind. They don't care about the religion idea. Their onus is on enhancing their own power, and they hate humanity. They hate civilization. It's 0.001% of psychopaths ultimately versus the rest of us who are morally capable human beings who share intrinsic values together. And so we need to stop buying into their divide and rule bullshit between the different religions and sects and creeds and nations and realize, no, it's psychopaths versus normally psychologically functioning people. And there's way more of us.
Amen, man. Amen. Joel, you're the man. Thank you for joining me.
Love you so much, man.
I love you too, man. This is awesome. We still have to meet in person. That's something that we still need to check the box on. But
yeah, it'll come, soon. Bro.
Sometime
for sure, man. Bro, I just respect you. I respect your platform. I respect your voice. You're a man on a mission, and I support it 100%.
Much love, bro. Same to you. And in the show notes, you can check out Here for the Truth podcast and their Rise Above the Herd offerings and everything else. So be sure to follow Joel too, because he has a lot of really great stuff to say. And I appreciate your voice so much, man. Thanks for joining me.